thank you very much for everyone to join us today. We are basically we're continuing our discussion around mining in Brazil, and together with James Wade-Jones, we're going to be talking about mining in Brazil and Sub-Saharan Africa, and especially trying to look at what are the different processes that different investors or mining company should implement in terms of their due diligence to be able to assess different risks to a mining property, what actually makes it more profitable than others, its performance on the different series of different variables, including climate change. And James is an expert as being able to target projects that actually are better in terms of their output and their performance for in terms of climate change, in terms also obviously on return on investment and financial return on investment. But here my idea by inviting James is obviously to continue discussing the new state of mining after COVID, the fact that many people and most people can't fly internationally. We're very lucky us to have our network in all countries in Latin America and in Africa that allow us to have regular feedback and information and intelligence from on the ground. But I know a lot of our colleagues and friends from the investor side or from mining companies have this limited capacity to be able to conduct counterparty risk assessment, due diligence, understanding a series of risk and concern into the mining property either that they operate or they're looking for potential acquisition or investment. And so I thought that James was the ideal person to invite. James, I'm kind of already just saying great things about you because James has this hat of being able to target mining properties, investing in the different minerals and different regions. But before I turn to you, James, and discuss a little bit what you've been doing and start asking you a question, I'm just going to take the time to do a little ritual that we have here, which unfortunately my legal team asked me to do every single week, is use my horrible French accent to read some legal texts and words. So basically the legal notice is here. The opinion expressed by today's panelists, so James, are their personal views and may not reflect the views of the organizations that they represent. Whenever possible, AMI has verified the accuracy of the information provided by third parties, but does not under any circumstances accept responsibility for any inaccuracies should they remain unverified. It is expected that webinar attendees will use the information provided in this webinar in conjunction with other information and with sound management practices. AMI therefore will not assume responsibility for commercial loss due to business decisions made based on the use or non-use of the information provided in today's webinar. So as every week, I'm trying to make reading these few lines as entertainable as possible, but it's not really a success every time. But please, James, let's start now. Thank you for joining us. We had the pleasure to discuss with you over the last few days and weeks, and I know that you also used the opportunity of our recent webinar with Thomas and the Agência Nacional de Mineração to work with us and get some information from ANAMA, and I kind of use this to just encourage anyone that would need help in terms of their governmental relations or community relations to sometimes we have the possibility, such as was the case with James, to help on a specific matter and use our connections and our knowledge of different communities and governmental actors to facilitate the entry into the or the solution of the problem. But James, maybe can you, you're the owner and founder of the Smart Way Group. You do operate a series of projects, or at least develop a series of projects in Brazil and also in Sub-Saharan Africa, Namibia, Botswana are countries that you're most interested in. Can you maybe just introduce yourself and the Smart Way Group and how you operate? And you're joining us from Johannesburg right now, if I'm not wrong, and maybe just explain a little bit your strategy and what you've done over the last few years.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Remy. It's obviously an honor and a privilege to be here today. And we've had a lot of good discussions over the last couple of days. And you, coming from yourself, you're a climate expert. I'm actually not an expert in that at all. I wish I was. Yeah, I'm basically.
I lost a little bit of track of my expertise on climate mitigation. I'm much more a mining above the grease expert now.
Yeah, yeah. I'm more of an entrepreneur, so I see myself coming in, from a project from a different pair of eyes, basically, and more from an auditing perspective, forensic auditing, but also using high-level technical overviews and also a vision too. You have to have a vision when you look at these projects, and I think a lot of the companies make that mistake. So they will come into a country, or they'll come into a project, or they'll even go into a specific mineral, and they would have not done their due diligence properly, or they've used a set of matrix, or they'd go to a big consulting firm And a lot of those companies make the same mistake. So what I did over many, many years is I looked at these companies from an auditing perspective, from a vision perspective, even from a project development perspective, explorations perspective, logistics perspective, and basically found out what they did incorrectly, or what I believe they did incorrectly, or what we believe they did incorrectly, and then obviously put the right people in place or address each of those risks. So for instance, logistics or mineral processing. In terms of getting into Brazil, we chose iron ore because basically China was going to boom. We were the first ones in Brazil in iron ore. People thought we were a bit crazy to be there in 2002, but it was just before the boom, and we had enough time to basically put the right strategies in place and also learn enough to be able to counteract any other risks that were coming in place. So for instance, we started looking at stockpile reprocessing before anyone else. We brought the technology to Brazil as soon as we could see that there was going to be an uplift in that technology. We moved on to the next aspect, which was obviously developing greenfields projects, but also very high grade projects. But not only high grade, they had to be in the right place. So we had to have enough time to be able to find those projects in the right place before anybody else. And we're competing with the major companies. So I think that's basically gives a bit of a summary of how we started.
Yeah, you mentioned something that I found was very interesting into the different talks that we had over the last few days, which you mentioned logistics, and we always advocating from the fact that actually when you do a counterparty risk assessment, due diligence, you have to be extremely cautious of understanding the comprehensiveness of risks and not just obviously look at the geology and look at the financing aspect to it, obviously, but also very much community relations, operational risk, reputational risk, political, economic risk at the local, regional, and national level. One element that you brought to my attention, which was very interesting, was the ensuring that the logistics to be able to support the operation were actually not potentially opening new concerns or new risks, making sure that port facilities were up and running and so on. Maybe can you actually explain how you look at it from this comprehensive supply and exports of minerals perspective?
Well, you have to go into a really in-depth study in terms of these. So you have to go. So I think the big companies call them deep dives, but I think we take it a little bit further. You have to have the strategy before you go into the deep dive, because you can't go into the deep dive unless you know which risks you're going to address. So for instance, like in Brazil for the port, when we arrived there, we knew that the big companies would not let us go onto the port terminals. We knew that. So everyone was telling us, okay, there's no ways you'll ever get there's no ways you'll ever get port access. So we thought, okay, so let's design a port. And then basically people were telling us, no, there's no ways you can design a port. And so what did we do? We found the best logistics company that we could find that was transshipping coal in Colombia and coal in India to basically come and address these risks. But we had to really go out of the industry norms to do that. So I think you need to have that strategy before you look at any, even addressing the risks in terms of deep dives or even in terms of logistics, because even in logistics, you'll have even more, high level, very technical related issues, like you need to dredge the port. The port has to be dredged. Or for instance, all the big companies, well, not all of them, many of the big companies in Africa made the same mistake in terms of these iron ore projects. So they looked at these massive iron ore projects. They had the resource, they had the supposedly the credentials, the stability in the country, but they didn't have enough, basically logistics either in place or even the strategy to get it in place, not knowing that there'll be environmental issues or issues related to the fact that the port needs to be dredged, or the channels are not deep enough, or there's too insensitive issues related to turtles or birds or or rainforests or anything like this. And a lot of those problems or issues are still happening right now today. Like for instance, there's a large Chinese company that's looking at a project that will link to Bahia State in Brazil, but we still see there's going to be problems there because the port has been moved 3 times because the government or other large companies didn't address the risks properly. right in the beginning, in the strategic phase. So we see that happening. We see that happening more and more in Africa. And because that's getting more and more complex, because now of COVID, you've got other risks, and you've got environmental risks, the social risks, you've got carbon tax risks, you've got, you know, all of these. I think you really need to come from a strategic perspective rather than, you know, addressing risks. So you need to have an overview, and then you need to get experts at each level, and you make sure those experts are the best in the industry. Yeah, that's my advice for this.
All that you're saying obviously is music to my ears. I mean, we, at AMI, we have a specific practice on logistics, work with DHL, UPS, FedEx, but obviously when we need to be able to do an assessment on the ground for a mining company or an investor of understanding, you know, issues of logistics, they're all over the world, you know, the mining. I mean, I'm seeing there's actually a message on chat from one of our friends from Peru. Peru is one country, when you look at Las Bambas, doing other properties, where the issue of being able to work on exporting minerals, on making sure that, you know, the logistic chains, on signing the right contract with, let's say, the trucker industry or others. All these are so many, you know, possibilities to raise future concerns that can either be linked to community relations, security, economic, you know, viability of your project. And we think it's fundamental. We kind of, to be honest with you, we had a series of panels with Minds and Money and with IMAC in Australia 2 weeks ago talking about M&A, and we keep seeing the M&A activity going, you know, very strongly. But obviously with the lack of strong due diligence on the ground. And I mean, already the trips to the mining side that some companies or investors would do once or twice already was not enough. But here at this point, it's very important not to think that you're going to make a great investment today, but actually realize 2 years or 3 years from now that you haven't done the due diligence on the ground to be able to assess logistics capacity that you were mentioning, but also there's a security, economic, and political. You were mentioning. Please continue.
Can I just touch on something for that? Yeah, even in terms of that, because what happens now is that to be able to get a project that's on the lowest cost curve, or, you know, you want to come and you want to enter into the industry, you need to really, you know, if you don't have huge capital, the billions of dollars, you either have to have the high grade or you have to have some differentiating factor. And it's not one or two differentiating factors. There's probably multiples. There's probably about 10 that you need. And just in terms of logistics, you can build a port. Like, for instance, the port that we ended up designing long before the port was actually in place. We designed a port that was 10 to 20 million tons, and we had a backup plan of another one for 25. And then another company came in with South Korean money, very large South Korean money, and with the Chinese as well, and built a port that was supposedly 50 million tons, but they hadn't done their due diligence to know that the grades were depleting in the iron quadrangle. So they hadn't done that part of it. And I think those type of, you know, high level and also on the ground, such as you guys do, on, you know, I think it's paramount. But I think you need both of them. I think you have to have, I think you have to, and I think you have to even go further than that. You have to involve academics. I think, and I've started like going out to yourself as well, like you professor and your PhD.
I'm a boring academic, as I mean, definitely one of these. Yes.
Not at all, Remi, not at all. So yeah, so I mean, even for the geology or the mining engineering, as an entrepreneur, we don't know enough, you know, but we need to know enough to be able to make the right decision. And to do that, we really need to reach out to the academic world, and involve them, and also mentor them within the system too, and on projects as well.
I can't believe that we actually haven't prepared those few lines and answers, because it's exactly what I wanted to hear, but we haven't prepared that, I promise. Andreas did something on the chat. You might want to check. It's the link to our LinkedIn group. If some of you are not, you know, accustomed to joining us every Tuesday, on this LinkedIn group, you have all the different interviews and events that we've done for the last 4 months. I had a lot of requests that, you know, James, on question about handouts and methodology of logistics. We're actually more than happy. I assume that you'll be happy also to organize meetings potentially with individuals that would want to continue discussing on methodology for risk assessment, for due diligence, whether it's on logistics or it's on other different factors. We have a white paper that, you know, Andreas, maybe you can send the link so that people can download, but all the methodology is there, and we're happy to engage much more in detail with each one of you. Please also use this chat to ask any question. We're trying to have this as, you know, interactive as possible. Going back to you, James, you mentioned specifically sustainability. When you look at the Smart Wear Group, that website is very much about looking at sustainability, not from the angle of window dressing sustainability because it's fashion. No, much more because you understand how to be able to assess the carbon footprint of different mining projects, things that might be extremely important already important today, but even more in 5, 10, 20 years when we see in the investment climates and regime on these issues. How are you able to choose the criteria or select the criteria that will turn you towards properties that are more sustainable than others?
Yeah, it's a very good question, because that I think that relates back to the vision as well, but the vision and the strategy, combining with experts. I think what you need to do, well, certainly what we did was we didn't choose a project. So we didn't go and say, okay, we're going to find high grade iron ore over there. Or we think high grade iron ore is going to be over there. Or we actually chose the clients first, or we chose the port first, or we chose or the steel mill first. For instance, the one steel mill that we would probably likely, well, I'm sure we will supply them, because we'll save them probably $13 a ton, and they're one of the largest steel mills in Latin America. But at the same time, what that steel mill does is they co-generate the electricity. So they co-generate 75% of the electricity with the gases. So the gases come off the steel mill. So that makes them profitable. So what we did is we looked at the EBITDA margins of all the steel mills in Brazil and even Latin America, and we saw the trends that they were going to. So if they were going to use technology, in other words, to advance their own business, we saw that as the trend. So we also went far down the value chain as well. And I think that's what's going to happen in the future too. I think all these companies, you're not just going to be able to put up a mine and sell to whoever you want to, because everyone's going to start questioning, okay, what is your carbon footprint? How much water are you using? Where you're getting your electricity, where you're putting your tailings dams, where all these things are very important factors, and they're becoming more and more important as we go. And I think COVID has actually addressed these things. But brought them to the forefront. So everything has been sped up in my view. I thought it would happen anyway, but I didn't think it would happen this quickly. And I think post-COVID, I think the pressure on companies is going to be carbon tax and environmental sustainability. And I think if you don't have that agenda right in the front, right in the forefront of your business plan and model, I think you're going to have a big problem. And I think a lot of companies are going to be, either lose a lot of business, or they're going to be taken out or taken over, or new businesses are going to come in and take the place of existing businesses because of that. And we see that happening in technology. And I think we're going to see it happening in mining as well, to some degree. Yeah.
No, I mean, Uzi asked a question on specifically the European Union Mandatory Human Rights Due Diligence legislation. We'll go over this maybe a little bit later, but it's definitely part of the agenda that we're going to touch upon with also United Nations few report that came in. But maybe still in the introduction, you're invested in Brazil. In the conversation that we had, we really went over Namibia, Botswana, different countries that are interesting in Sub-Saharan Africa. Can I maybe just ask, pick your brain, according to you and based on those criteria, why did you invest first in Brazil? And why are you choosing those jurisdictions in Africa? I mean, we're looking at all across Africa. We do have the same kind of metrics that you do, but it'd be interesting maybe to hear it from someone else.
Well, I think we see Africa as the future in terms of mining, and without any doubt. I mean, the geology is there. But the problem with Africa is not only infrastructure, and it's not only political stability. You have to actually understand the culture. You have to understand that in some countries there are 250 dialects. You have to understand that they need hospitals, they need schools, they need, basic health services. And if these things aren't present, like for instance, COVID now has just addressed many other issues which could happen in terms of hunger and even terrorism. There's terrorism now in Africa. So you have to really look at these risks, and you have to look at the trends, in terms of where it's going. So it's not, for instance, we went into Botswana I used the one financial crisis to go into Botswana to look at potentially copper projects I even looked at coal bed methane, but I knew that coal bed methane was going to, well, I had a very good suspicion that coal bed methane would be going out. But how would you get your energy source in Botswana? You know, if you weren't going to use coal bed methane, you need some energy. So in terms of this, so some of these aspects you would use, but some you wouldn't. But you look at it from a very high level. You know your absolute certain criteria that you need. You need low cost, sustainable energy. You need to have a location. You need to be away from communities. You need to be either away from big water sources, or you need to have water sources to process minerals. You need labor force. You need labor force on the ground. You need skilled labor. So I think all these aspects, are extremely important. But in terms of Brazil, why we chose Brazil was because we see Brazil. Yeah. Sorry, Remi?
Go to Brazil because I want you to build on Africa. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but that's okay. We're launching Africa Market Intelligence officially next month. We've done a lot of homework towards this. What's interesting is to look also, when you look at a country, let's say we talked about Mozambique during the preparation, and Mozambique is one of those countries that if you actually see it from the outside looking in, you will see a high number of, let's say, terrorism and activity from militias, but they're really much more in the north of the country and unlikely to go south because of the natural gas and the total exploration and projects there that, obviously will not, is so much of importance for national security that there's very unlikely possibilities for those militias to go through 1,000 kilometers down to Maputo or other regions that are much more interesting for mining. On the other hand, if you look at energy, you'll see plenty of energy generation, but most of the energy generating in Mozambique is actually channeled towards South Africa, and there's real issues of energy to power a mine. So if you take it from outside and just look at your computers and raw data and raw numbers from the World Bank and others, you are actually going to get exactly the opposite picture on Mozambique, which we believe has strong potential. Corruption is very important. There's institutional issues that are, but you really have to get, your source on the ground. The academics that you mentioned go through our networks of our former students from, Canadian universities or North American universities that are now that were originally from those countries and are very linked to us still. But that's where it's very important to go very much into the detail of due diligence and understanding from local sources on a regular basis with sound methodologies. And that, turning back to Brazil then, James, sorry to cut you the first time. Why did you choose Brazil? Minas Gerais makes sense, obviously, but maybe just walk us through your process.
Well, Minas Gerais, Minas Gerais is essentially an industrial powerhouse, which very few people know about. So, in terms of risk adjustments, we knew if we couldn't get the port and we couldn't get the railroad, we'd always be able to sell to many steel mills, and or many other basically industrial plants, not just in the steel business. For instance, there's a silicone metal plant, one of the largest in the world, is actually in Minas Gerais. Minas Gerais is also a massive coffee producer, so they've got huge agriculture. So, if it's counter-cyclical industry in the mining, that Minas Gerais is not going to fall over because it's got this huge mining industry. So I think in terms of judging, in one country or one specific thing, you need counter-cyclical industries, you need counter-cyclical minerals, you need counter-cyclical or counter-cyclical plants, and also in different industries related to obviously different industries. So I think these, and you also have to see trends. So as again, we go back to the trends factor. But not only that, you need fundamentals. So the fundamentals of Minas Gerais is that it's got a railroad. And not only a railroad, it's got a wide gauge railroad to multiple ports. Those multiple ports are run by some of the biggest companies and some of the best run companies like Vale, Companhia Siderúrgica Nacional. You've got Trafigura there, which is in with Mubadala. So, and you don't only have one or two of those. There's about 5 different options. And we knew, while we were there, we watched the whole process open up as well. CADE ensured that the competition was created, so the jobs could be created. So I think Minas Gerais is extremely strategic in terms of not only logistics, but also industry, and also because it's got counter-cyclical industries, and it's got a very good workforce as well. You've got 6 million people, and they're extremely good at engineering and geology, especially in the big companies. They've been trained. Some of the people at Fiteco, Simitri, Samako, these are highly trained, highly skilled people. And I think and I think they just need to mentor the young people. But I think Minas Gerais is one of the most strategic locations, certainly for mining and certainly in Latin America.
We're very bullish on Minas Gerais. Also, we had the chance to have several interactions with Anglo-American, with Anglo-Ashanti that are also based in Minas Gerais for decades. In the case of, there's such an history in the site of Anglo-Ashanti if you have the chance to go there. The location has been used for telenovela across the world. It's very, very interesting to look at it. But going more into the more serious aspect to it, that you pointing this out shows the importance of creating regional alliances, creating some basic relationships, not only with the government, because usually governmental affairs, yes, you have to go through the basic guidelines for an EIA, there are some requirements and so on, but a government usually is going to be supporting you because you're bringing economic development. What's important is really to be able to build those relationships with different key companies, sometimes not in the mining sector, it could be in a complete different sector, but to try to find areas of joint interest to build a platform for the development of the territory, to engage with the communities, to engage with the politicians. And Minas Gerais is a wonderful place because that's where this work has been done for quite a while, and we see it developing. But also there could be other areas that we're more than happy to suggest in a follow-up call. I'd like to, if you're okay, James, because I don't want to let Kuzia way too much on this question. What is your take on the importance of different, let's say, demands, clarification, improvement, more transparency in the supply chain, when you're looking, for example, at the human rights rules that the European Union is now implementing for due diligence, for example, or you're seeing other different movement towards that direction? What's your take on it? And then obviously I'll be happy to complete.
Yeah, I think with the human rights thing, I think it's very important, and I think just in terms of something which happened in Australia recently with the Aborigines, they, a big company, Rio Tinto went and blew up a mine, or to open a mine, they blew up an historical site. I think those type of things they cannot happen anymore, so it's not only, I don't think it's only human rights. I think it goes a little bit further than that. I think it goes into the culture, it goes into history. There's a company in Africa that's actually training some of their staff on learning the history of basically their own culture, and I think these things are going to happen more and more, so I think it's not only the laws and stuff that's happening, and I think it's going to have to be a part of the company's makeups. But in terms of things like the DRC, we know that the cobalt's mined by, or some of the cobalt's mined by children. And that's just not acceptable. But like what Tesla says, that they weren't going to buy the cobalt in the DRC, but they went and signed a deal with Glencore. But now that's being investigated. Glencore's now being investigated for many things in Africa. And I think those type of things are going to happen more and more, and there's going to be so much pressure, and the shareholders are going to put pressure on. BlackRock came out and said they don't want to invest in 212 companies, and I think that's the start. They got $7 trillion under asset management. They're worth $30 trillion. And they're a serious player in the global mining industry, and I think they're going to put a lot of pressure on these big mining companies. And I think the transparency is going to happen more and more and more in terms of not only on the auditing side, but there will be sort of other reports that they would have to do, like a carbon this carbon report will have to involve environmental and full auditing of not only the supply chain, but where your tailings dam is what's in your tailings dam, what's the makeup of it. I think that's going to happen more and more, and I think the companies need to address it immediately, right now, today. I think it's before it's too late, because I think the carbon tax alone is going to be a problem. It'll make a lot of companies unprofitable. For instance, the coal, if you have using coal to for your plant or for your mine, I think you're going to have a big problem pretty soon, in terms of carbon tax, and it's going to be quite substantial.
Yeah, building on your comment, I obviously agree. But this specific, let's say, European proposition on mandatory human rights due diligence legislation, that's just one, among many, in a sense that it's an interesting one. It's different because it's mandatory, so binding component is going to be much more important. Obviously, that makes the whole, importance of this. But when you're looking at it, I mean, there's been over the last 5 to 10 years a real push towards transparency on supply chain. We are invested with the World Gold Council in terms of their responsible gold mining principle. We had, Terry Eamon present this in the former, coffee chat, and we really involved into it and try to be able to assess the quality of a mining operations. But more generally, if I were to provide an advice to investors or to mining company, this is not something that's gonna go, in a sense. Mentioned BlackRock. Societe Generale already has discounts on their loans based on the social performances on the different mining companies that actually go through their services. That's something that will be generalized through the sector and the industry, maybe not tomorrow morning, but in the short run. What we do and what we advocate for, I mean, we've been very engaged into the OECD Sustainable Development Objectives. I can't do it in English anymore, but we work on Latin America in many countries on this. But basically, mainstreaming those Sustainable Development Goals, here you go, into mining companies, understanding the elements of water. We actually, next mining chat is going to be on water use and ESG finance, by the way. But this is something that is very important. When we look at, and you mentioned also something in the preparation, the specific study that the United Nations, I'm just using that transition, did specifically on battery metals, on supplies, specifically shortage of supplies of good quality battery metals, looking at this towards, that 5 to 10, 15 years perspective, especially with this increasing, accountability and need to have good practices in your supplies of minerals. How do you understand that? And what is the potential that you see through this into the battery metal sphere?
I think there's going to be very big shortages, but I think those shortages will be addressed immediately. Well, not immediately, but by technology in one aspect. But I mean, even the technology needs time to adapt. So you can have something at lab scale that needs to be upscaled to pilot stage and then into production. But yeah, so I think in terms of, especially in terms of battery metals, I think there are going to be shortages, and there's also not only that, there's also countries which have issues. So some specific countries are, I mean, even here in South Africa, we've got manganese. We sit on 80% of the world's manganese, and that's a critical mineral for battery metals. Graphite as well. You've got graphite in Mozambique and Madagascar, but there are issues to mine some of those minerals. And China controls 90% of the world's graphite production. So I think there's going to be issues in terms of, definitely in terms of basically the supply of these minerals. And I think what's going to happen is that companies are going to basically innovate as quickly as they can. You have technology companies probably investing in some of these mining projects, which I think you're having now with the car companies. You've got Volkswagen investing in certain companies. You've got POSCO investing in other ones in battery technology, and they're each looking at their own specific niche or their own specific high grade requirement in terms of this. So they might even change something. They might look at molybdenum instead of cobalt, or they might look at high grade quartz and graphite instead of an alternative, just the graphite or something like that, and also in terms of more conductivity. But I think this is a folding and a developing story, and I think it's going to continue. And I think what's going to happen, and I think it's also going to move much faster than we think because of COVID and because of the need to basically reduce emissions. I mean, car emissions are really off the charts, and it's causing, and it's actually, you're having reports going out that 9 million people are dying a year in terms, or prematurely dying in terms of pollution. I mean, that's only what they know. So there might even be a lot more than that, and that's even more than COVID and many other diseases. And also they also cause many other diseases. So little tiny little particles go into your brain. So I think it's going to be not only a trend, it's going to become a part of companies' makeup. So I think it's. So I think the battery metals is going to be there is going to be a supply shortage of many of them.
Obviously, and you were mentioning impact with pollution, impact on global health. I mean, what COVID is opening is the fact that these issues of global health are here to stay. I mean, we're going to be seeing much more analysis of what causes harm to human health. The discussion whether the flu. I mean, there's plenty of people that die of the flu, and then you actually realize there's many people that die of the flu, even more of COVID, obviously. But when you look at air pollution. When you look at sound pollution, you look at a series of different impact in the main cities. We're seeing cities after cities taking a series of legislation. Paris was just taking new decisions after the municipal elections 2 weeks ago about getting rid of cars downtown in a series of places. So obviously there's going to be a lot of pressure on the quality of atmosphere, of health and others, which is linked obviously to the minerals and the energy that you're using to power your different industry and economy. So this is something that we need to do, and the industry needs to do really their homework, understanding the potential external negative externalities of each mineral having its own risk. I mean, obviously we're not talking here about the informal miners from the gold sector, maybe a little bit in very precious other metals, but there are different risks whether you're looking at nickel, graphite, you're looking at lithium. There's very different operational risks, but also community risk or reputational risk that you would have here. You mentioned something that I think was interesting, which is innovation. We invested a lot over the last few weeks and months of our innovation for community relations and different platforms. But I know you've worked a lot on innovation in terms of improving the output and the productive capacity of different assets that you've been analyzing. Where can you actually maybe give us a basic, let's say, outline of the main innovation that you've seen that as groundbreaking over the last 5 years, and where do you see this going over the next few years?
Very good question. Difficult question, but a good one.
I'm sorry for that.
Yeah.
As you mentioned, my years as an academic, a decade of my students asking the question I didn't want them to ask because I sometimes haven't done all the readings or something, right? So it's my turn to ask difficult questions now. That's good.
Yeah, no, obviously we focused on iron ore. So many people just think you go and dig up iron ore out of the ground and you stick it in a steel mill and that's the end of that. But it's not like that, because you take the iron ore and each element of that ore, each impurity has an effect on either the maintenance of the plant or the pollution in China. So the iron ore in Brazil can affect pollution and health of people in China, and it's hard for us to fathom that, but it actually does. And I think in terms of technology and stuff and innovation, I think we looked at we brought technology to Brazil, because we thought that processing these waste stockpiles was so important. In fact, it was. There was, it still is important. But I think it's gone beyond that now because that technology has happened. But now what I believe needs to happen is we have to have such a deep understanding of the technical aspects of the makeup of minerals. For instance, iron ore, the particle sizing is important. The magnetic susceptibility is important. Basically the origin is important. Where is it from? How did it get there? Because that's going to tell you, basically, will help you, or aid you, or guide you to see what you can actually do, to either remove the impurities or to make a product which you can put into the marketplace, which will work. So many companies have tried this. They've made hot briquetted iron or some sort of pig iron product or steel related product, but they haven't addressed the real issues in terms of strategy. Where's your strategy? What do you need to do? So I think that's going to happen more and more. And I think, I don't think we got it completely right. I think we should have looked more in depth sooner. And I think the larger companies would have adopted that sooner if that had happened. So now what's happened is you've got companies looking at dry processing in terms of iron ore, but it's still not at scale. It's only at lab scale. So that might not be the right way to go. I don't know because I don't know the ore structures and the makeups and stuff, but I get a sense that it might not be the right way to go. And in terms of, and I think what you're going to find is you're going to have niches. So for instance, we're looking at a niche product for let's say bauxite. We're looking at bauxite at the moment. you know, and people think bauxite as well, that's just a product that you make aluminium out of. But no, you can make other products too. You make high-tech products out of this. And also the quartz, we've got quartz as well. You know, high purity quartz is very important now. It might be used in battery metals. So I think you're gonna look at you know, you have to look at these minerals in a completely different light. And I think you look at it from a more technical aspect, and certainly in terms of minerals that have always been processed one way, all these companies doing, you know, looking at it one way in terms of steel making or electric arc furnace or as a blast furnace, or what is the aluminium or what is the phosphorus content. I think you've got to go 3 steps back and look at it, look at the origin, the particle sizing. You know, I think you've got to use I think you have to use geologists, geophysicists, and geochemists, and geometallurgists, and pyrometallurgy as well, all combined. And I think you need to put them in one room, and I think you need to put them in one room for a very long time to sit and brainstorm these things. And I think that's going to have to solve these problems that have been created because of volume and a lot of urbanization and you know, a lot of people moving into cities and huge infrastructure projects happening, and that's going to continue and can continue ad infinitum. There's still 300 or 400 million people that have to move into the cities in China alone. Africa's got 1 billion people. Africa's going to be 2 billion people in under 20 years. I mean, can you imagine another 1 billion people on a continent? So they all need to eat food. They all want phones. They all want a modern life. So I think we have to move to an industry where we look at full 360. You look at the entire chain, and you look at innovation and technology as a part of mining, not just as an add-on, you know, to solve a problem at a later stage. I think you need to look at it right at the front.
I agree. I'm very, very interesting. We have a comment from Donald on community in Africa. I'll address that just a little bit later. Just feel free to ask any question from the audience if you want. But I'd like to continue working on this question of, you know, both supply and use of mineral for new technology, new innovation. And we're seeing, and we've been contacted by a series of different companies, whether from the car industry or from the battery manufacturer, that now are deciding, you know, the Samsung or the Renault or companies that have decided to just making sure of the transparency of the supply, making sure that they will not face, you know, reputational risk down the road because they actually, you know, sourced, lithium from a production site that actually did not abide by certain areas of rules. So there's much more due diligence coming from almost the end consumer to the mining site now. From the other way around, you're more mentioning the idea of trying to find some new use to graphite, some new use to bauxite, some new use to different minerals. How do you actually try to have this prospective look? Do you engage with companies? Do you try to provide, like saying, like the substitution with this new type of nickel that we are producing makes much more sense? Are you the driver of this innovation this way, and how do you work on that?
No, I wouldn't say we're the drivers of it, but we certainly have seen the trends.
Yeah.
So and because we can follow the trends, we can actually talk to them and assist them, and you know, talk with the plant. For instance, the one plant that we'll deal with, we'll go and take our quartz and go and do advanced studies on it. But at the same time, we'll send our quartz to Germany and do advanced studies of that to see if it can be used for battery minerals. And I think these type of things are important. I think you need to be talking to the companies more. The mining companies need to be talking to the steel mills if they are in iron ore, or you know, if they are in battery metals, they need to be engaging with the car companies directly, with the Teslas, the Volkswagens, the Toyotas, you know. And I think that's going to be happening more and more. You know, as we go forward, especially post-COVID recoveries. Yeah.
To build on Donald's question and comment, and maybe then after I'll turn to Arthur, because I know Arthur has a few questions on Brazil specifically. But you know, you've been working and operating for several years and decades in Africa, and that you're much more present in Brazil than you used to be. What is your perspective on how a mining company, obviously it's a general question, you have to look at specific countries one by one, but how do you feel that your company has changed and evolved from its African component and its Latin American component? What makes them unique, and how do you actually have to adapt your structure and your corporate structure to the actual market that you're addressing and operating in?
Well, I think the culture is the most important. You know, these unique cultures that are prevalent in Africa and Latin America, and a lot of a lot of investors don't understand this, and a lot of companies don't even understand this, and even your end user doesn't understand it at many times. So you need to really delve into the culture and obviously become a part of it. So a to get their trust, B because it makes sense, and yeah, it's obviously the way to go. It's the way we should all involve. We can each learn from each other, and the amount of things, or the amount of the manner of business that I've learned in Brazil, and I can use that in Africa, and the amount what I've learned in Africa and I can use it in Brazil is quite phenomenal actually. And you would never find that in any textbook. You would never find that even if you went to consultants, because you would need to really have that in-depth on the ground experience, I would say. Yeah. So it's and obviously you need the contacts, and you need to really immerse yourself in the cultures, and also in the way that the business is done. And from doing that, you'll learn, you'll grow. And this cross-cultural aspect, I think, is so important. I think we can all learn from each other in everything that we do. So.
And rebounding on a question from Norman. Norman is a great mining engineer from Chile. I'm not from Chile, Canadian, living in Chile now. Here's the question: Is there not a greater lack of transparency from some of the fully Chinese-owned mining companies, which are supplying direct to China and are not subject to the same supply chain oversight by investors? What's your perspective on Chinese company operating compared to other companies, and your presence and your work with them?
Well, I've helped some Chinese companies. I've advised them. I've very large companies, and what I've seen is that they have their own perspective of how things should work, and the West has their own perspectives on how they should work. But I think there has been a huge lack of transparency, and I think they need to move towards being more transparent. And I think that's going to be, it will be a sign, but at the same time, there's also a clampdown in terms of political. There's a political clampdown in China in terms of it being this communist country, and it's run from top down, and that's it. And everything's run from, one level and then onto a municipal level. And that's correct. That does happen. And at the same time, they've got 8,000 tailings dams. Nobody knows anything about them, and those might even be risks in terms of the iron ore industry. If one of those fails, or many of those fail, and there's one, not specifically iron ore, but another mineral that has actually failed. So, and I think what's going to happen is there'll be more pressure on the Chinese companies to adhere to policies such as the UN policies. I'm sure they will reject them initially, but they have to move towards them, because at the same time they need sustainability. Their people need to breathe. They need to grow, and for them to do that, they have to basically follow the trends of what's happening. I suppose we get back to the trend factor again. Yeah.
And I may just mention, just to complete this, although we might not have a lot of time, we actually might dedicate a specific mining coffee chat about mining Chinese mining companies. We actually do have interaction with several of them. They're very different from one another. I mean, one should not put into the same bag, historical Beijing-based state-owned enterprises to more regional state-owned enterprise, and sometimes even more small. They're a very different type of animals here, of understanding of the different countries, of operating a relationship also with the Chinese embassies in different countries. And probably we'll do a specific coffee chat on that. I'd like to turn to Arthur. Sorry, I've been Arthur wait for a little while. Arthur, you had a question on Brazil. Please pardon me for just making you wait like this.
No worries. So my question is more surrounding the deforestation in the Amazon and the effects it has on exploration. So as I'm sure and everyone here knows, there's been a lot of pressure on the Bolsonaro administration to limit illegal deforestation of the Amazon. And there's a lot of burning down, and there has been an increase in the land that has been damaged. But at the same time, there's also a political agenda from many people in Europe, from many people in the left, that are trying to paint this picture that mining and agriculture is basically should not be prioritized. because they have their own interests. In Europe, they obviously want to protect their own agricultural interests. They'll want to protect their own mining interests as well. So how do you balance this issue of deforestation with the issue of potentially extracting things from the land? Is there a proper way to balance it so that both sides benefit?
I believe there is, Arthur, and I also believe, the Amazon is a very big place. I mean, people have you can't really visualize this, this incredibly enormous piece of land with huge trees on it. And the conquistadors, you can actually see them going through the forest. You can actually see it if you go and take satellite, imagery and stuff. And I think Brazil has done a good job. And I think they take a lot of flack in terms of overseas, putting pressure on them. And obviously they've got a big responsibility. There's no doubt about that. I mean, it's importance in terms of, the Amazon creates its own clouds, and those clouds, move over Brazil and drops rain, and that rain is incredibly important for agriculture in itself. So, so I think, I think Brazil has taken a lot of flack, but I think they've also done a lot of good in terms of protecting a lot of the land. So, for instance, like a lot of those indigenous land is protected. Like 50% of that land is, but you can't do anything with it in any case. And you go to other countries and you can do it. So I think the Amazon should have more oversight. But in terms of Pará state, I mean, it's got less governance than the other states that are further south. I mean, you're from Porto Alegre, I know. I mean, you know that Porto Alegre is probably a more stricter, sort of state-run. It's got more stricter governance and rules and stuff. But I mean, obviously the rules are there, but the oversight is the problem. It's just such a vast area, and I think illegal mining is a problem. Illegal gold mining is a problem. But I think in terms of large-scale mining and large-scale farming, I think it's going to have to be very well controlled and managed. And but I believe Brazil will step up to the plate and do it properly. I have that faith. I mean, I've flown over some of these places. I mean, there's so much forest, it's unbelievable. But you've got the Sahara further south, which has got massive agricultural land. You've got Bahia, you've got Ceará state, you've got, there are so many states in Brazil that has potential for mining and farming, that you don't need to farm. You don't need to farm and go and take minerals out of the Amazon. And one of our projects, actually, we want to try and stop that. It's a very large American company, believe it or not, that was looking at many thousands of mineral rights in Brazil. So I find it a bit strange that some of those countries would put pressure on Brazil when at the same time some of the companies are actually looking at exploring it. So I think there's a balance with everything, and I think that a lot of the information is not always as correct as we'd like it to be as well.
Thank you. Yep.
I think sustainable mining and sustainable farming, definitely, I think it's possible.
Mm-hmm.
If I want to maybe build on this, and as you could tell, by the way, Arthur is my go-to guy for anything that has to do with Brazil and Central America. As you can see, a younger, more handsome version of me. When I'm going to go on vacation, is probably going to do the coffee chat, and probably many more people is going to be joining. But I like to build specifically on what you were saying. Our different engagements in Brazil have been extremely diverse over the last few years. I mean, we worked on gold, on rare earth, on so many different minerals. We worked on different provinces and states in Brazil, from Amapá, Maranhão to obviously Minas Gerais to Pará. The reality is very different from one state to the next. Where do you see in terms of exploration? And I know it's a very big question, and we just have 3 minutes for you to answer. Where do you see the potential in terms of exploration? We hear Goiás, we hear Pará, we hear Mato Grosso also very much. What's your take on this?
Tocantins, definitely.
Oh, yes,
Goiás, without a doubt. Bahia state for sure. When they build the railroad, or when they get the railroad in place, I think it's got huge potential. And then obviously Pará, I think, is unexplored. Well, it's not unexplored, but it's certainly got a lot of potential for things like copper. The world needs copper, and Brazil's only 12% explored. And if you think, like, we found our project in the quadrangle, and the quadrangle's been mined, had gold mining for 500 years. It's had iron ore mining for 200 years, you know, and we could still manage to go and find a project there, just because the area is so vast. So I think in terms of states, I think the geology of Brazil is going to surprise many, and I think to the upside. And I mean, I've looked at projects. I've been given projects that I've got a pile of them somewhere there that I'd love to just put geologists on and just, you know, spend a year studying, you know, various, you know, anomalies or occurrences or geochemical, geophysical anomalies that we've picked up or someone else has picked up. And I think it's got huge potential. I think Brazil's got really, and I think it's undiscovered and unknown, and thank goodness for that. And I think the younger Brazil, I think we need to train geologists, Brazilian geologists, mining engineers, geochemists, and we actually want to let a student do a master's and a PhD on our bauxite and a master's and a PhD on our iron ore, for instance. You know, and we think those type of studies and stuff will you know, put the industry forward to find more discoveries north.
Talking about the industry and maybe closing with that last question, I just got a question by email. Maybe it's confidential, so I don't want to mention the person that asked it, but it's a very simple question. Obviously, we talk about Brazil. There's no way to talk about Brazil without talking about São Marco, Brumadinho, obviously the impact that it had on the perception of the mining sector in Brazil. There are some work done by IBRAM, probably could do better and more. I know the other sectors in Brazil sometimes do very good work, especially for the agro-industrial sector, for the reputation of the sector. What do you see the reputation of the mining sector in Brazil? How do you see the demands from communities and contribution to the state, maybe potentially an increase of royalties down the road, if that's the case? Probably not with Bolsonaro, but that could be in the books. And we're seeing a lot of evolution nationally in Brasilia, in the Congress. I will just refer people to some of the publication we did on the AMI website and sometimes other practice that detail this. But what's your take on this? And I give you 2 minutes. I'm sorry, but we almost done.
Okay, 2 minutes. 2 minutes on Brumadinho. Wow. Okay.
2 minutes on mining in Brazil, the future and the past.
Yeah. No, I think what's going to happen is because, you know, in the past all the mining projects were put in place, and then the communities were built around the projects. I think what's going to happen is Brazil's already made these laws where you can only have a tailings dam 25 kilometers from a project, you know, for any new project. And I think these laws are fantastic. I mean, Brazil's they're leading the world in terms of this. I mean, China, it's 1 kilometer. In other countries, it's even more. Or even less, sorry, but it's between 1 and 20 kilometers. So I think Brazil's leading it. Ibrahim's doing an amazing job. Julian Neri, head of sustainability, he's a fantastic industry expert, on the ground knowledge. So I think as long as you've got the right people in place, and also obviously in terms of the finance minister in Brazil, I think you've got the right people in place in the economy. You've got Brazilian ministers that are trained outside, that bring the skills back to Brazil. So I think they're going to address these things such as community issues. You obviously got to provide jobs. We've got to increase royalties to the municipality. I think they're only 12.5% now. Maybe increase those and less to the state, or have some sort of other criteria, you know, to do that in terms of, you know, helping the communities. And I think mining companies such as ours, I think we need to train those people and help those communities. I think we need to educate them and provide them, you know, at least some sort of, you know, positive way to get out of their predicament, if they are in a predicament.
And this is an entire circle, in the sense that mining companies actually understand the importance of engaging with communities, of developing maybe bottom-up approach to local development, of creating value, are able to communicate soundly on this, and we're happy to give you plenty of advice on how to do this. Then obviously that's the path forward. And even during, you know, we're looking at Brazil, I remember one of the time I went to Minas Gerais was a couple of weeks, a month after the São Marco tailing dam, and I was at the property of Angulo Shanti in Nova Lima. I talked to different, you know, communities that were close to the Angulo Shanti mining site, but also others. And even if they were in Minas Gerais, they actually understand that each property is different, each company is different, the risks are different for one another. So there's a real understanding of the contribution of mining in those mining jurisdictions. It's a little harder in Pará, it's a little harder in Amapá, it's a little harder in areas. But here again, if you arrive with the right kind of engagement, the right best practices, and you explain your strategy and you engage with the right tools of community relations, we'll do something specifically on this in the future, then you can actually make the case and not be impacted too much by Brumadinho and San Marco. I went myself above time. It's 12:01, my friends. We commit to always stopping on time, so we're going to stop right now. But as always, the recording of this coffee chat will be available on LinkedIn. We're here to answer questions and engage into conversation. We're developing a series of white papers and thought leadership on a series of topics in which we might actually contact you. And it was a pleasure, James, to have you on board for this talk, and maybe not the last one. And I'm looking forward to future talks with you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Thank you. It's been fantastic. Thank you, Remi.
Enjoy Joburg for us, okay? I miss it. I need to go back to the future.
Misses you too.
Thank you, James.
Everyone, have a wonderful day. Thank you, Walter.